Voices from the Mausoleum is brought to you by the You Run Podcast Network and yourunpodcast.com.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Voices from the Mausoleum, and welcome to an episode of 5 Influential Horror, a series where I talk to all kinds of horror fans about their 5 most influential horror and why they picked them. Today, joining me again, very excited about this, is Chris Vander Kaay. We recently chatted about your movie, your found footage movie, Ask. And Steve and I covered it on a Found Footage Fridays episode. If I remember, I'll try to put them in the cloud somewhere above my head in post set or when I set it up on YouTube. But today we are back to talk your 6 influential horror movies and why you picked them. How are you?
Good. Thank you for letting me show up and immediately break the rules of the episode.
No, I also have to announce this because this has not happened since, I don't know, maybe the 3rd or 4th episode. I've been doing this particular show for 3 years. This is the first time where all movies on a list have never been on the show before.
I'm going to consider that a win? Question mark?
Yeah, I'm never able to say that anymore because, of course, once you have enough people on, there's bound to be overlap. And I'm like 99% sure the only one on here that may have been on here that I may not remember is your one of them we'll talk about, but I don't think it has. I think I'm only thinking it because I like that movie a lot, but we'll get into it. But yeah, no, I think everything on your list is the first time for the series, which is super exciting.
That's awesome. I'm going to consider my life as a contrarian finally worthwhile because I showed up.
You've got some great ones though.
So, well, yeah, no, I'm super excited. These are all movies that I've loved for as long as most of them have been out. I got to a few of them late, but they've been ever since I saw them, they've been hugely influential on me at various points in my life. So I'm super excited to talk about them, especially if nobody else has, because it makes me feel like I get to be that kid in the neighborhood that has the one copy of the movie that nobody else has seen and they want to come over and watch it. So
I love it. That's great. Yeah. So your first 2 that we're going to talk about, we'll talk about them kind of one at a time, but these you mentioned were kind of tied up as far as why we're doing 6 instead of 5. So the first one we're going to talk about is The Burbs.
Yes. Yeah. And obviously we'll get in a second into why it's tied up with this other one that throws the list into chaos and makes it 6 instead of 5. But the reason I picked The Burbs and also why it only counts as half a movie to me is because it's very borderline horror. It's clearly satirizing horror more than it is any actual horror itself.
Yeah.
I think it's arguably much more a really funny comedy that happens to play with horror tropes than it is really a horror movie at all.
Sure.
However, it does such a great job with all of the horror tropes.
I agree.
I think for me, we could get into the story in a minute, but the single most emblematic moment for me of that movie of how great a job it does is satirizing is there's a moment where I think it's the first time that they see someone come out of the big scary house. And they're doing slow zooms on everyone's face as the first comes out for the first time. And it's like zoom in on Tom Hanks's face, zoom in on Bruce Dern's face, and then the old neighbor. And then they do a slow zoom on the dog's face that the old neighbor is holding, like a dramatic zoom on this dog's face. And I was like, okay, this movie is exactly my sense of humor. I love that because it's just as dramatic a zoom as anybody else's, but it's for this tiny little poofy dog.
The small dog. Yeah.
It's so funny.
Yeah, no, it's great. I actually didn't see that. I saw this for the first time just a few years back. A friend of mine actually was like, just out of curiosity, have you ever seen The Burbs? I was like, I've probably seen it. I knew it sounded familiar. I was like, I've probably seen the poster, but no, I don't think I'd ever seen it. He was like, you got to stop everything you're doing and watch this movie. He's like, I think you're going to absolutely love it. And at the time it was streaming on something. And so I was like, all right, yeah, I mean, I'll watch it. It didn't normally steer me wrong. And so, I fell in love with it immediately. And I will tell you, in general, anything that has comedy in it is a very fine line for me. I'm very picky, but this is just one of those movies that you can just be entertained by. It doesn't have to be anything crazy heavy, or you don't have to nitpick it and watch it super closely or anything. So it's just a really, really fun time.
Yeah. And I mean, I've always loved Joe Dante for the exact reason I love The Burbs so much, which is it's so clear the love that he has for film in general, to the point that even when he's making making fun of, satirizing. He's doing it totally out of love. Like you
Yeah.
can tell that all of the tropes that he's leaning into are things that he loved in the movies himself. That's the reason that he's sort of there's no cynicism to the way that he pokes fun at something. It really
Right.
feels like he loves it so much and he wants to. I mean, he grew up in the Roger Corman School of Filmmaking. He's not shy about knowing what movies have, amateurish aspects or when a movie
Yeah.
is low budget, but he's always had a love for the want to tell stories, and the bigger the better. And he just has such a love of making fun of the tropes of a genre without ever making it feel like he thinks he's better than them. He did
Yeah.
it in the Gremlins films. He did it in Small Soldiers. Like he'll find a genre that fits that, and then he'll really sort of take it over the top, but in a loving way.
Yeah, it is. You took the word right out of my mouth. I was gonna say it's almost like a love letter to it. It never feels disrespectful or, like you said, looked down on. It's very no, I love it. And those are great. Gremlins and Small Soldiers are great examples of taking that and kind of doing it in those two, because those are also very funny movies.
Yeah. Yeah. And it always made me a little sad that his career did not go the same as a lot of other, I call them like the Spielberg acolytes from that era, people who their movies
Yeah.
were produced by Spielberg. Like Richard Donner had a huge action career. And
Yeah.
like Joe Dante had very successful films, but it just seemed at a certain point, I would say like post 2000s, he sort of started, I don't know if he lost the audience. I know he made a very expensive Looney Tunes movie that didn't do very well, and I don't know if that's the thing that was sort of the nail in the coffin for him.
Yeah, maybe.
Looney Tunes Back in Action, which I love. I loved all of his movies, but I sometimes think that people they just don't get the tone of his movies. Sometimes they don't appreciate the sense of humor, or possibly they just don't get. There's just so many references and so many layers to a lot of what he does. Sure. That but yeah, I love it. And this is one of my favorite ones. It's a miracle that we got it, because it was during the writer's strike that they couldn't even have a writer on set when they made it.
Oh, wow.
So,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, it's kind of a miracle that it came out, let alone that it's as good as it is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. And it is a really great movie. And it's one of those things too, like, because it is an older film, like, I don't feel like it's lost anything in time. Some things that came out around, I would say similar around this time, but there's humor elements or things that are said that haven't really aged very well. And I don't feel like this is one of those examples. I feel like this is something that if you were to watch as a 2024 first watch, I mean, I think it's just as comical or engaging as it was, whenever I didn't see it until a couple years ago, but in general, timeline wise. So, I mean, it's aged very, very well, I feel like.
For sure. Yeah. The only part that even feels remotely dated is Corey Feldman's character, but even that feels like it's more of a parody of that character than it is. Like it almost looks like Joe Dante knew that this was not going to age well and was almost doing it as a satire of the character that is of the era teen, and so it plays more as a joke now. So yeah, that's the only part that really feels of an era, and even then it feels like it's a satire of that era. So
like it's intentional. Yeah. That one has not been on. Some of these I'm surprised haven't been, but I think that one kind of does surprise me, because I do feel like it, like you said, it does play with the horror side of things as well. So I'm actually quite intrigued by the fact that it hasn't come up until now, actually.
Yeah. I would think it was hugely influential to people as a gateway horror, because
it's perfect for that.
Yeah.
For sure. No, for sure. And I think if you go into that movie blind, I think it can be quite surprising of an experience, because I didn't know anything about it other than being told I should watch it. And I knew that Tom Hanks was in it. So I was like, okay, well, why not? But going into it blind, I think made the experience even better, because it was a very pleasant surprise overall. So in some of the directions that it goes. So yeah,
for sure. And it's strange to me that it never got a reevaluation when Tom Hanks became like the most well-known actor in the world. Like it's always crazy to me that stuff from someone's career, when they become enormous, like we don't go back and that doesn't become a big thing again,
Yeah, because I think that I don't often hear this one come up in general conversation. I'll see people post about it from time to time. It definitely has a following. But to your point, it's not like one of those films that just everybody's always constantly putting on rotation or talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they will now because of our conversation. So,
that's right.
Job done.
And so the next one we're going to talk about that was tied for, I guess, half of a film with the Burbs, is Winners Tape All.
Yes. So yeah, Winners Tape All, the Henderson brothers story. Now this is an interesting one, and again, the reason it's a a half mention is because it's technically a fake documentary that's a comedy, but it's a comedy about two brothers who make horror movies. They make shot on video horror movies. Actually, they just made two in the 80s, and then they stopped. And the premise of the movie is this is like a talking head retrospective documentary interviewing these two brothers many, many years later about these two shot on video movies that they made out in the middle of, in the Midwest. That basically they never did anything ever again. And so it's like this sort of love letter to these two guys that, tried and failed to make it in the business by going to shoot a VHS film. I believe the films were Stabberman and Cannibal Swim Club, I believe, were the names of the two movies that they made. So it gives you a sense of the vibe of the movie, which is
for sure.
So anybody who's ever seen a grade Z shot on video horror movie from the 80s will appreciate this movie. And also anybody who loves I guess you would say like the mockumentaries of Christopher Guest. It's sort of a Christopher Guest style behind the scenes, but it's almost entirely just talking heads of the two brothers and then quote unquote archival footage from the making of the movie. It's really just scenes that they shot and then made it look like it was an old movie. But this was hugely influential to me. I saw this before I shot my fake documentary. And it was probably one of the early found footage / fake documentary films that I saw that made me feel like there's a lot of room to do all kinds of interesting, weird stuff in the fake genre. I mean, the fake documentary genre. It was right around the same time I saw WNUF Halloween special and this, and then a movie called Mr. Jones, which I also like for different reasons. They were all movies that were trying very interesting things within the framework. And I was like, that's really what got my wheels turning early on, like making me think, well, I don't have to just make a 4 kids go into the woods story or team of paranormal investigators go into a house story. Like there's a lot of other places I could take this genre. So that was hugely influential. Like I said, I probably saw it 5 years before I made my film, but it stuck with me so incredibly strongly and also had me searching out more fake documentaries. Because while I liked some, I was not the rabid fan that I am now until I had seen some like this that made me feel like, oh, there's like a whole world out there.
Yeah, I've never heard of this one. So this is one it sounds super awesome. And I like stuff like what you're talking about too. Even aside from it, maybe it not being like hyper focused on like horror, but I love fake documentaries. I think in general, it's just a very interesting thing. And to your point, I have started to find ones that are really, really unique. So I'll have to add this to my list of things to find to watch because I hadn't heard of it, but I'm super intrigued.
Yeah. And this is one of those titles that, it's not going to hit for everybody, but the reason I always mention it is because I can't imagine they spent much money on this film either. It's a really, really inexpensive film, but the love for the genre and for the kinds of films that they're talking about is so apparent in this film. Justin Channel's actually in it. I don't know if you know Justin Channel, also involved in the making of WNUF Halloween special and a few other.
Oh, I think so then. Yes. Because I'm familiar with WNUF. So I think so. I think I know who that is.
Yeah. So there's some fingerprints on this from other films of the in the same arena. But I really love it. I'm always surprised that the two guys that play the brothers in this haven't been in more stuff because they're so natural on screen. Like they're very goofy, but they're so natural on screen that I'm always surprised that somebody hasn't contacted them and asked them to be in something else. I really haven't seen them in much of anything. Because they're just really, really good, which again, we've talked about before. That's not always the thing you find in fake documentary and found footage films is like natural winning personalities on screen. A lot of times it's very clunky, not great performances, but you stick with it because you like the movie more than you like the performance. But I really like the two guys in this.
Yeah, I'll have to check that one out because like I said, I hadn't heard of it before. But I do like that subgenre of filmmaking. I think it can be like a lot of fun. Like some of the ones like WNUF in particular, not super my cup of tea because I hate like ads in real life and it's mostly ads. And I know it's meant to be funny and hokey and I love what it did, but I prefer like Ghost Watch. That's probably more my like speed with that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I watched a mockumentary about aliens that was just like, pun not intended, but sort of out of this world. Like it was so well done. And I like the ones that will like are so well done that even if you're laughing or you have moments of like where something is meant to be a little more silly, where you can question whether or not it actually happened.
Yep.
I love when it's that moment of like, is this something that should I be making sure that this isn't real? And I like stuff like that too.
Yeah. Well, that I kind of felt similarly with I don't know if you've ever seen Lunopolis, but that's one where that it's sort of a conspiracy theory fake doc. So it's not found footage.
I love stuff like
but
that.
it's about a secret society that lives on the moon and these two filmmakers that are like looking into it and where it comes. So I won't say anything more than that because that is a very fun movie to go in as blind as possible. But it's called Lunopolis, Luno, Lunopolis. But it's very similar to Winner's Tape All in the sense of like it feels very handmade, like super indie, but like just an enormous amount of passion and really a lot of cleverness too. So
yeah, I'll have to check.
So this accidentally became a 7 list now instead of a 6 because I threw that one in at the end. But yeah, I always recommend this one. Like I said, it'll maybe have a 60-70% hit rate. There will be some people that just aren't on its wavelength, but I loved it and I recommend it to everybody just because for the people who would benefit from seeing it, who would like it, nobody knows about it. So I just want to sort of like sing its praises as much as possible.
Yeah, no, rightfully so. Yeah, because like I said, I hadn't heard of it. So, so your next one that we're going to talk about is Pontypool.
Yes. So Pontypool is not only one of my top 5 influential horror films, it's probably one of my 5 favorite films of all time.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when I try to explain to someone what it is that I love about this movie, it's difficult for me to explain why I think this movie does what it does better than other movies do. Because it's $1 million Canadian film. It all takes place basically inside of a radio station in the basement of a church in a tiny town in Canada. And Stephen McHattie plays in the lead role. He plays a sort of a shock jock who's fallen on hard times and is working in this middle of this tiny town when a strange outbreak starts to take place. But we don't see the outbreak. We only hear it because we're only experiencing it through Stephen McHattie's character, Grant Mazzy, in the radio station. And so it's about how little pieces of information, calls, the guy that's the traffic copter guy, locals, a doctor that crawls in inexplicably through a window at one point. I think they get a call from the BBC at one point. And it's all of this. It's really interesting. It's kind of in some ways it's a satire or commentary on the way that the information ecosystem works nowadays, where people are leading with they're leading with opinion before they're leading with information. Like we know how somebody feels about something before we actually have any facts about that something. But the movie, I don't know if we're trying to steer clear of spoilers, so I don't know that I want to give away the big surprise of what the outbreak is or how it happens.
Yeah, we can avoid it if you're able to talk about it without it.
Then for sure. So what I would say is that there is a big revelation about what this outbreak is that's happening in the town, and more surprising than that is the way that this outbreak is happening, like what's causing it. And I've never seen a movie that did something like that is so outlandish and weird, but took it entirely seriously, in the sense that like deadly stakes in this movie, and they were never winking at the audience. Like there's definitely absurdity to the story, but they're never winking. And I thought that's a really delicate balance to strike, because it's not a comedy, but it is absolutely absurd,
Yeah, no, it is. It's a really hard balance. And I think the movies that are able to do that and do it well are very few and far between. I think it's it is a very intricate. It has, what it kind of reminds me of, and it's not the same thing, obviously, but it kind of reminds me of like some of the ways I felt when I watched Night of the Comet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. It's a movie that it's definitely satirical, but it's not broadly satirical. Like the characters in the story don't know that they're being made fun of. Like they're taking it seriously. Right? There's stakes for them. It's only us as an audience that recognizes the absurdity of it. For sure. Yeah. And also I just think it's rare that you get like it's such a powerful central performance on which an entire movie hangs in the horror genre. Because usually so much of it is about the intensity of the gore or the chase scenes or the whatever it is. This movie hangs entirely on basically looking at one man's grizzled face as he listens to things. That's actually very difficult to pull off and be compelling.
Agreed. No, I totally agree.
Yeah. And I can't lie. Half of the reason that I felt any level of confidence in making Ask, which is a movie that's like 85% a camera pointed back at my own face. The only reason that I felt like it was worth the risk is because I know I had seen a movie that was 80% just a man's face on screen for the most part. And I was moved by it. Doesn't mean I could match it, but it felt like there is room in the world for me to have been moved by that thing. Then maybe that means that I could make a thing that other people would also be moved by, So
yeah. Because I think when we talked about, your movie, one of the things we talked about was the fact that what I talked about specifically being a viewer was that it felt engaging the entire time. And to your point, when there is just one primary, I mean, there's a couple other people here and there, but it's 95% you.
Yeah.
It's very, it can get boring very quickly. It can lose just attention span because you're just like, okay, well, but no, I see the parallels there with that because it was very engaging watching Ask. I never felt like I was tired of seeing you. I never felt like I was like, when is something else I never felt that way. And I think I mentioned when we chatted before that is a really difficult thing to balance because I think people, we get oversaturated with characters and background characters and scenery changes. And we get so used to just our brains just keep spinning and spinning into different areas of the story. And it's all over the place. So for it to be more centralized is definitely, I think, a harder thing to pull off for sure.
For sure. Yeah. And that's one of the two pieces about Pontypool that was so inspirational. And the other one was also in Ask, which is really just leaning into the weirdness, like just, if you're going to use a strange idea, go full blast into the strange idea, don't nibble around the corners, just dive in. Because that's absolutely what they did. At about the 30-minute mark in Pontypool, they make a big revelation. And then the next hour is literally just like going further and further into that crazy, until by the end of the movie, there's actually the coda at the end of the film is really straight. It's really hard to describe. And a lot of people don't even actually know what it means, the way that it ends. And I don't want to spoil it, so I won't say. But yeah, and that was the same thing I did with Ask. I was like, if they're going to watch a guy talking on screen all this time, there has to be some element of the insane, the outlandish, the absurd, the unexplainable that will make them worth sitting through, So that's I would say probably this movie has informed my interest in the odd more than almost any other film, and like just really peering into the corner of the weirdness, like don't just use it for decoration, like really lean into it and make it the centerpiece.
Yeah, I love that. No, yeah, I love that. I'm kind of surprised that one hasn't been on before too. Just because I feel like I don't feel like it's one of those movies where when you talk to people, a lot of people are going to be like, oh, I've never seen that. Like, I think most people, it feels like a movie that a lot of people have seen. So like when you want to talk about it, usually able to talk about it. I'm surprised that hasn't been on the list before.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder if one of the reasons is because it's hard to recommend because all of the things that make it interesting and weird are things you can't tell them about it because those are all the fun revelations.
That's a good point. Yeah. That's a good point.
I'm just this is just a trust me, bro type of situation. Like I can't tell you anything else. You gotta see it. I promise.
Just do it. Yeah. Well, cool. So the next one we're going to talk about is Tremors.
Yes. And this is probably, although I think The Burbs is a little older, Tremors is the movie that has been in my life the longest. I saw this at the youngest age. I think it came out in 1990 for sure. I think I probably would have seen it in 91 or 92. Yeah. So it's the one, and I was raised, I was not allowed to see horror films when I was young. My parents were very strict religious, conservative Christians. So I didn't see any of this kind of stuff. So I only saw Tremors because a friend of mine, Juan, introduced it to me, and he's not a horror fan at all. So how this snuck through, I'm not sure. I think he's a comedy fan, and he liked that it was sort of a satire of those old 50s science fiction giant monster movies. And so he was coming at it from that perspective, but he showed it to me and I was totally on board because I never got any kind of monster stuff at all, any kind of monster or horror or anything. And so, so Tremors to me is one of like it's perfect from a structural perspective. When you look at it as a movie, there's not a single ounce of fat anywhere on this film. In the early sequences where you think you're just getting to know characters, they're actually very carefully seeding all kinds of important plot points that you will come back to that are going to be absolutely necessary for. In fact, the literal opening shot of the movie gives you a piece of information that you need to have the triumphant moment in the final 5 minutes of the movie. Yeah. And it's the construction of that movie is genius. It's so rare nowadays to find a movie like the original Back to the Future or Tremors, where it's so clear that the filmmakers were not just creating fun characters and a good adventure, but like some of the tightest writing I've ever seen in a movie.
Yeah. I mean, well, and so my history with what I grew up with as far as entertainment, the horror stuff that I got exposed to, I watched a lot of stuff on the Sci-Fi Channel with my dad.
Mhm.
And so like a ton of it came from there, and they showed Tremors always. Like Tremors was always on the Sci-Fi Channel. So while I don't remember like how old I was the first time I watched it, I've probably seen it a couple hundred times in my lifetime just because when it was on, we watched it and it became this like, and then of course there's more than one movie, but the original to me is just like such a fun monster movie. Like I think I'm a big creature feature kind of for like person. And so anything in the realm of that, whether it's giant bugs or what, doesn't matter, it's going to check a lot of boxes for me. I think Tremors is another real one that you can just put on and just laugh at and have fun with. I don't,
Yeah.
it's not super depressing. At least not to me. I guess maybe, I don't know, maybe it is to somebody, but it's not to me. And I think it's a great movie. I don't think I know anybody that puts Tremors in like a never going to watch this again kind of box. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people hold it in pretty high regard.
Yeah, I've never heard anything more than like, yeah, it was okay. Like I've never heard any worse than, yeah, I kind of liked it. Like I don't know anybody
No,
who
I
hates
hate that
Tremors.
movie. It's the
Yeah.
worst movie I've ever seen. Nothing like that.
Yeah. And the thing I love about Tremors, I hope as people think back, they remember, and I'm recommending the first Tremors. The other ones are fun. I'm not bad mouthing.
Yeah, but the first one's where it's at.
Yeah, that the first one, first of all, is the only theatrical release. All the rest of them were direct to video.
Yep.
And apparently insanely lucrative for Universal because not only did they make a huge amount of money on DVD, but like you said, they played endlessly on the Sci-Fi Channel,
All the
like
time.
to the degree that there was a single season television show spin-off of Tremors simply because the movies made so much money for them that they thought, let's get in on this.
Let's do it. Yeah.
But yeah, there's something really fun about. I agree with you. There's a weird positivity to a movie about carnivorous underground worms that you wouldn't expect. Like there's a whole community that comes together,
They do.
disparate people from different backgrounds that all like try to help each other. And you've got some like wild varieties. You know what I mean? You've got like an Asian immigrant who owns a store. You've got like the Native American and Mexican people who live there. You've got the gun nuts that live up on the hill, and yet they're all still part of an enclave that cares about each other and ultimately will try and defend and protect everybody. And it's like, in a way, it's like a kind of a wish fulfillment of America. Like, wouldn't it be great if
it was like that?
Right? Yeah. And so in a way, it's kind of like wish fulfillment. I don't want to be attacked by a giant worm, but wouldn't it be nice if we all got together to fight the bad guy that was outside instead of making each other the bad guy,
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like what do they call it? Like a feel-good movie.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the
like
only feel-good movie I can think of with giant murderous worms in it, for sure.
Sure. But it's like to your point though, when they have those moments of success where they're cheering and they're excited, you feel the same way.
Yeah.
When you think you're about to lose somebody or when something bad happens, you feel the same. You're like worried and stressed like they are. Like you do genuinely end up caring about the people in the movie. They do a great job of making you care about them. But I think I would consider it like almost like a feel-good movie because, at the end, you're just kind of like, like it's a good feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And the shadow of this movie cast looms long for me. In fact, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but Tommy Hudson was a filmmaker who's made a lot of retrospective documentaries. He did the Elm Street Legacy film. He did the Crystal Lake Memories. He's done a lot of the really long retrospective docs where they interview everybody that's been in all the franchises. He and I were working to make a Tremors one, and it almost happened. It was so close to happening. We were literally like about 3 weeks out from shooting, and then the producers ended up pulling funding because we knew we weren't going to be able to get Kevin Bacon, but they said as long as you get one of the leads, Fred Ward, we'll still do it. And Fred Ward, when we contacted his people, and he said his contact said under no circumstances does he want to talk about that movie or any other film from his past. And so we were shut down. They wouldn't do it. And so they wouldn't, because there was, Michael Gross was on board and he was in all of them. So we were excited because we were like, we've got the main guy for everything.
Yeah.
So it never happened. And then Fred Ward passed away, unfortunately. So, I just don't think it'll ever happen again. Although ironically, Kevin Bacon obviously became comfortable with talking about Tremors because he went back and shot a pilot for a potential Tremors TV series that didn't get picked up. So maybe we should have reached out to Kevin Bacon at that time. I guess we'll never know.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah. It was so close. That's the project that got away from me, the big one. So
Yeah. Because, like, why wouldn't he want to talk about Tremors?
It's a good question. I don't know. Sometimes, I mean, for a long time, Kevin Bacon didn't want to talk about Friday the 13th. You know, actors don't want to have whatever they consider their embarrassing title in their past, you know, that they don't want to discuss.
Weird.
Yeah. And, you know, my hope was that he would have come full circle at some point and said, no, that goofy carnivorous worm movie has a warm place in my heart or whatever, like Kevin Bacon did. But it just, you know, just never happened.
Everybody should just be like Matthew Lillard and just own everything they've ever done.
Right? There needs to be more like, his shaggy energy in the world, man.
Yeah, he loves everything he's done. Like, I mean, he was really leading Scream fans on for the longest time about Stu Macher not being dead. Like, everything he's done, he's just been like, I loved that I did that, you know?
Yeah.
You'd think everybody would be like
for sure. Well, and same like with Nicolas Cage. Like, he's done a lot of stuff that people sort of dismiss. But the thing with Nicolas Cage is he always says, I never phoned it in. I definitely signed up for movies sometimes because I knew I needed to be making something because I had bills to pay and all that kind of stuff. But he said, I never phoned in a performance in my entire life. You know, I showed up and I did the work and I'm proud of the work, regardless of what you think of the movie. So. And like, I think Matthew Lillard has that similar energy because he's probably been in stuff that he's not necessarily like quote unquote proud of in terms of like the final result. But like, that doesn't mean that he didn't show up and give it his all, you know, and nobody ever sets out to make a bad movie, you know?
No, for sure. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, no, I love Tremors. Like I said, it was a big part of my childhood. I feel like I even distinctly can hear my mom complaining about us watching it again because it was always in the living room, and she was like, "We are not watching this again." Like, she was so sick of Tremors for like the longest time because we watched it just over and over and over. But it's one of those movies you could like start it if it's in the middle of it and you could still watch the rest of it. Like, you're not, you know what I mean? It's never, it's not one where I feel like I have to watch it 100% from start to finish. I can come in and out if I want to. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just quotable line after quotable line in that movie. I still laugh to this day. Anytime someone's going on a trip or they're leaving the house, I'll always walk over if I'm like, we're supposed to be giving them something as they're leaving. I always quote, Chang when they're getting ready on horseback to leave, he walks up to them and he goes, "I got you guys some Swiss cheese and some bullets."
Oh yeah.
And I just say that to everybody. Anytime I'm like, if they're leaving from Thanksgiving and I'm handing them a box, I'm always, "I got you some Swiss cheese and some bullets."
I love that. That's great. Yeah, Tremors is great. I'm glad that it was on here and we had a chance to talk about it because it's a great movie. So your next one is one I actually, believe it or not, I've not seen. But it's been on my radar for a long time, which is They Look Like People.
Yes. And this is an interesting one that is, I would argue, equally responsible, along with Pontypool, for being inspirational to the project that I did ask. It's not found footage at all. It's a micro budget film, but it's a narrative style film. But the premise of the whole film is that there's these two friends that are, I want to say mid-20 somethings maybe. They've been out in the world. One was in a relationship, and we think at the beginning we're kind of seeing the dissolution of that relationship. He's not with her anymore, and we don't exactly know why. So he goes to stay with his friend who is struggling to have business success in the world. So he's working at this business and he like listens to all these motivational tapes about, you know, like you gotta grab life by the balls kind of stuff, you know, like, and he's like one of those guys, but he's not that guy. He's listening to that stuff because he's trying to become that guy because he feels like he's not. And, but the center of the movie is about this one guy, the one who's just broken up. He's been having these strange, I don't know what you call them. He'll wake up at night and he'll think he hears strange sounds coming from his wife, like cracking and bones and movement and stuff. And he gets what he thinks are these strange phone calls telling them that a great thing is going to be happening soon. The change is coming. People around him have been infected. There's something happening to people. And he's the only one that is aware of it. And he has to be prepared for whatever this coming is. Right. And we start to get the sense that this is probably not real, but his behavior, his lack of awareness of the difference between fantasy and reality starts to become uncomfortable because he's now staying with his friend who they've been friends with since they were kids, and he trusts him a lot. And so there's a lot of room for him to be accepting of the struggles he's going through. And you really start to genuinely worry, like, how disturbed is this man? What's going to happen to real people because of the potentially very violent fantasies that he's going through? Sure. And more than anything, the movie is kind of about the problems of how hard it is for a guy to live in a society that's not toxically masculine to him when he's only around other men. And
Okay.
so it's about,
Oh.
guys won't reach out when they have mental problems, about how
Right.
guys won't reach out when they have relationship problems. And
Yeah.
it's about these two guys and how them learning to be able to lean on someone else and to have that relationship with another guy that's not toxic ends up in some way saving both of them, without spoiling it, because there is a really strong, dark third act. But it's so unexpected, first of all, for this kind of film, for a story that I described to you actually ultimately be about toxic masculinity is really surprising. But the other thing I loved about it is they had I think they had sort of like, and this is where it influences Ask, is they had like a general idea of what they wanted the film to be about, but they didn't have like a lockdown script with lines written out for everything that the scenes needed to be. They basically knew, all right, they're in this house. This is the thing that happens here. Let's workshop it. And they just sort of figured it out in the moment.
And that's kind of what you did.
Yeah, exactly. And well, this is why this movie was inspirational to me. I actually showed this to my screenwriting classes, all the semesters that I was teaching screenwriting, because I wanted them to understand that telling a story isn't always just about having characters say things. Sometimes, like, this was a great script, even though it wasn't written. And that's the thing I tried to get my students to understand is like, the journey of a character is the story you're telling. It's not necessarily the things that happen to them and the words they say. It's the emotional arc. And this movie was so impressive to me because it did such a good job saying all of that stuff, even though he never really put it down on paper, like he never said, here's the thesis of this film. They found the thesis in the working of the creation of it. And that just blew my mind that it was possible. So I absolutely have to credit that film as being, super influential to me, even bothering to create a movie in that same style.
Wow. Well, I'm sold. I'll have to watch it. I've never seen it.
Yeah, and the two leads are fantastic. They've actually worked with the director, Perry Blackshear, three times now. They've made 3 micro-budget films. They Look Like People, a film called The Siren, which has the same 3 leads, the 2 of them and the actors from this. And then another film called, I think it's called When They Consume You or When She Consumes You. I can't remember which it's called. But all 3 of them are micro-budget, sort of 3-hander horror films that are much more sort of psychological character studies that have this veneer of genre to them to allow you to plumb the depths where like nobody would probably want to just watch a movie about 2 guys dealing with their
I know what you mean.
masculine issues. But if you layer that horror on top of it, people are willing to sit through it.
People are intrigued.
Yeah. So anyway, I can't speak highly enough of this movie. I recommend it to everybody, even though, like I said, it'll probably be about 70% hit rate. Some people are going to think it's a little slow or there's not enough effects, but like, for me, the reason it's so powerful is because of the insinuation. There are similar aspects to Pontypool in that a lot of the creepiness is the phone calls that he's having and the things he thinks he's hearing. So a lot of it is audio in nature, but also just, man, fantastic character study done entirely without a net. They were just out there making it in real time.
Yeah, that's crazy. I don't know how anybody does that. It's insane to me because Creep was done the same way. Creep is completely improv.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, like it's not that hard for me because like I'm the only guy on screen. Like the only person I have to please is me. That's way easier for me. But like they're out there. This movie's 3 lead characters, multiple locations, and they're just sort of like, how did you just showed up and just started shooting? How did that work? You guys are insane. No,
that's awesome. Yeah, I'll have to watch it and then circle back and tell you what I think because I think it's been on my. I'm picturing the poster in my head. I think the reason I avoided it is because the poster reminds me of an A24 movie that I hate called It Comes at Night.
It Comes at Night.
It Comes at Night. I hated that movie like more than is rational. Like I hate it so much. And it's not that the poster is identical because it's not, but it's simplistic and the coloration, I think, because when I was getting ready to chat about these with you, I looked this one up because I was like, I know I've heard of this before. Anyway, so I saw the poster and I'm pretty sure the reason I avoided it is because it reminded me of that movie, which I loathe. Loathe.
You're right. Now that you mention it, like that minimalist design on the poster with the text in the middle, It Comes at Night, They Look Like People is like very similarly structured for sure.
Yeah. And I think that I might have thought they were the same movie. And so I would have avoided it because I thought it was that other one, which I hate.
Yeah.
So
which I mean, obviously, I liked it, so obviously liked it more than you. But they're very different films. So I will say the poster is where the similarities begin and end.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, if you ever see anything that's similar to that, don't ever recommend it.
Got it. You're clear. Noted.
So your last one, I'm super pumped to talk about, as I'm sure you knew I would be, because the last one we're going to talk about tonight is Savage Land,
Yes.
which is one of my top 5 found footage movies. It's one of my favorite mockumentaries, one of my favorite horror movies. I love this one so much, so I'm super excited that it was on here.
Yeah, and I think you and I had talked about doing this, I think before we actually did the interview,
Yeah.
when we talked about Ask. So I didn't know how much you loved Savage Land when I put this on the list. So this isn't even a cheat. I can't even say like, oh, I put this on there because I knew Angel liked it so much. I just happen to think similar to you. I would argue probably that this is my top 2 or 3 favorite found footage films ever. Mm-hmm. And again, probably lands somewhere in the 10 to 15 top films, because it does several things, and it does all of them so well. The first thing it does is it perfectly emulates that kind of like 48 hours special, yes. You know what I mean? Like it pops up on a Friday, only 65-year-olds are watching it, and it's a story about some dude that killed his wife, that kind of vibe.
Totally agree.
They nailed it, right? Like so good. The way that they use stock footage in the B-roll, and even the way that it's shot is like parts of it look professional, and then you can tell they would like do soft focus when they had bad footage that they couldn't really use that well. So like the meta level of it being accurate, that's one, which I think is fantastic. The second is I've never seen a found footage film that did a reconstruction of a night's events in a more interesting and terrifying way than the one they chose, which is that single roll of film from a camera that this one guy took during this terrible night's events, this massacre that happened. We're piecing together the entirety of the journey that they've told us about in the first few minutes through one photograph at a time. And then we're just holding on this shot. We're holding on this still image, and we're hearing the implication of what they think the image is telling us. This one single fraction of a second in real time, this blurry image of it might mean one thing or it might mean another. And I've never seen a movie that effectively skirts with the idea of having so little information and it being terrifying, because you're just staring at this one thing, and like what you imagine it is probably telling you is so horrifying, you know, and in a way, so much more effective than if we had seen footage of that same thing happening.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to add to that. I think this is, to me, what I would consider insanely smart filmmaking. Because you've got a situation where the images are not sharp. There's not a lot of clear. Now there's one picture where part of it is very clear, and it's horribly upsetting to look at. But to your point, because they look the way they look, it still maintains believability, but you find yourself being deeply bothered by what you're seeing. And I think, like, first of all, when I say smart, I also mean because, like, if you don't have, you know, what it might take to make something like this look the way you want it to look on a video, as in a video format, this is like such a great way to get around that while still, you know, obviously introducing those elements to the story to get viewers involved. But when I tell you, so I watched this movie for the first time, not quite 2 years, maybe like almost 2 years ago. It came out in 2018, but I saw it like 2 years ago because we covered it on Found Footage Fridays. It was a random find. Don't even remember how I found it, but I was like, I'm gonna watch it. And like we mentioned earlier, talking about mockumentary style films, this was one where I stopped it after, I don't know, maybe like 15 minutes or something, and looked up to make sure that it was not real, because it doesn't present, you know, as we go through the pictures, like you're talking about, where it's going through the night, the first half hour isn't overwhelmingly terrifying. It escalates as the story goes. So the beginning parts of it, when you're seeing the photos, it's not off base to think that that could be real. And so and then at the end of it, when it was over, I had to find like a happy show to watch, because it left, first of all, it's a deeply upsetting, thematically, it's a deeply upsetting film. It's very relevant in today's political climate. But aside from that, it has some really heart-wrenching moments that are really upsetting. And I couldn't shake it after I watched it. And that very rarely happens to me. But this was just one of those examples where I was just like, I fell in love with it. Like the first watch, I was like, this is something special. And I have like clung to that since I saw it for the first time.
Well, and you touched on the third point just a second ago, which was the other big thing for me, is when a movie can be, like you said, when we talked about the first one, which is that it was really effective evocation of the thing that it's emulating. Second was it's the brilliant use of the pictures. And the third one was the resonance thematically, socially, politically. Like it's, like you said, it was shot in, I think, 2014 through 2016. They were making it. It came out in about 2018.
Yeah.
It is horrifying how prescient it is now, possibly more now than even when it came out. Which is depressing, but it's also unbelievable in just sort of in terms of like the brilliance and the forward thinking of the filmmakers, not only to be able to talk about that, but to do it in such a complex and interesting way that also, it's not spoiler alert because I'm actually saying it, they introduce an element in this film that you don't know is a part of the movie, a revelation about what is actually happening in this town that also reinvigorates a kind of, I guess you would call it a movie creature, monster, or concept that you've seen in other films, but you would never have seen it coming from the starting point of this movie. And the explanation of the way that it folds into the story is so realistic that if you were ever going to believe this thing could happen, this is the way that you would believe.
This is how it would be. No, I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Stunning. I mean,
stunning movie.
The interviews, like, I will tell you this, that piece of garbage from the bar, and then the guy that does the radio show, if I like, those are people I want to physically harm, because they are just such garbage people, like that whole like get out of our town kind of crap, like they played those, and you're supposed to hate them. You're not supposed to, well, most of us should hate them, but they're like, when you're talking about believability in a mockumentary, like I Lake Mungo was probably my first introduction to mockumentary style found footage horror stuff specifically. And I just thought, like, there's been a few that I've seen that just didn't quite meet Lake Mungo, but then I saw this one and it like surpassed it, at least for me personally. And I couldn't believe, as many people that were involved in the project, how ridiculously believable every single person on camera was. There was not a single person that they had tell a story, recap, give an opinion that didn't feel like somebody you could actually meet and go talk to. Like, it was insane.
Yeah, nothing broke the illusion.
Not once.
Which so rarely happens, because even the best ones, the best of intentions, there's one performance, or there's a clunky visual effect, or there's some little thing. Nothing in this film.
No.
And I would say, similar to you, I had seen other fake documentaries before. I mean, I go all the way back to Blair Witch. I saw Blair Witch in theater, so I've seen them. But seeing this one, I would watch found footage films for the rest of my life. I would sift through all the garbage in the world in the hope that there was one more film like Savage Land out there. Like, to me, that's how inspiring it was. It's like, I will sit through any garbage in the world to get the feeling that I had for this 75 minutes of this movie,
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Because I think one of the things that, and I may have mentioned this when we talked about Ask, but when you're, especially as a content creator, or even just as a fan, you don't have to be a content creator, you go through so much of a genre that you love, whether it's comic book superhero stuff, whether it's sci-fi, it doesn't matter. You go through so much of it because you love it, that eventually, in most cases, you will reach a point where you're like, I'm so tired of this. Like, I need something better in this genre that I care about. And so I think right around the time I watched this for the first time, we had been through some duds for Found Footage Fridays, and I was getting burnt out on found footage because I was like, seriously, like, God, there's some bad. You said it best. You said the good and bad thing, right, is that anybody can do these. And so it's a good thing when you find stuff like this, like Savage Land, but it can be a bad thing because you just watch so much of it that you're just like, Jesus. And so I went into this just kind of meh. And when I tell you I was not prepared, but I'm with you, it restored my faith in the fact that there are older found footage movies I haven't discovered yet that are going to just blow my mind. And this bar none was one of them. Like, it's insane.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point. You said there's older ones that I haven't found. And because I always think, people have that opinion where they're like, I'll just go to whatever Facebook group for found footage films and ask what are the 20 best movies and just watch those. 5 years ago, however many years ago it was, when I saw this, no one was talking about it. No one had heard of it.
No,
I was the one that found it. I was the one preaching. So when I say I keep searching, it's because no one told me about this one. No one told me about Winners Take All, you know?
Yeah.
So like so many of these movies are ones I stumble onto because I'm willing to dig through, I'm willing to dig through the coal to find the diamond,
No, for sure.
And I think it's one of the reasons why I think a lot of found footage film fans do that. They'll stick it out, and there's a bunch that they don't like, but they're sticking it out because every once in a while there's going to be that one that sort of blows their mind,
We suffer through it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, like you said, it reminds me of, I don't know if you ever played the game Oregon Trail. Everybody in school had to play it at my age. But like, it reminds me of like watching found footage films is sometimes in the winter when you go out hunting many times and you never shoot anything. It's like that time where it's so frustrating because all you want, you just need to feed the family. Yeah. Like that's what it feels like. It's like the 10th found footage film in a row. It's not terrible. It's just the same damn thing. I need something else. I need some meat on the bone,
Yeah. And I'm like, and I hate it because like, I feel like I've gotten a little harder to please in that department because I've seen so much of it, but like there'll be like, there's another big found footage junkie named Mattopod on socials. And he and I always talk about found footage, and when he finds stuff, he sends it, or he'll send me like TikToks of found footage movies that he's not sure if I've seen or whatever. He's the one that introduced me to the mockumentary about the aliens, which is, it's called The Gulf of Silence. And unfortunately, the creator of the film was bullied by conspiracy theorists. And so the movie will never be released, which is super unfortunate. But he is he and I never agree on found footage movies. I'm always like, oh, I hated that. And he's like, oh, it's my favorite, but when he tells me that one is bad, I know to stay as far away from it as I possibly can, because there are just some out there that are just rough, but Savage Land is not one of them. Yeah. Savage Land is just a masterful design of dread and human experience and emotion in a raw sense that it's so hard, I think, to capture. And I was just blown away at what they were able to do with that story. I mean, it's just such a phenomenal movie.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't summarize it better than that. If you don't believe me, you should believe Angel, because
it's good. We're both telling you, go watch it if you haven't. Yeah. One of these days I'm going to bust out my VHS back here and see if my VHS player still works. It's in the closet. So I think it still works, but because how cool would that be to watch it? And I keep telling myself I'm going to do it and then I forget, but
well, it feels like the kind of movie that you would have taped off a TV. You know what I mean? Like it feels like a special. Like you're saying, like it's the 48-hour special that played Friday at 9:30 or whatever.
And taking it to your friend's house to freak them out and show them too. Yep. Like that's the kind of experience.
For sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. But well, cool. Yeah, I love Savage Land. If you, I don't know, if you've been around this long and you haven't watched Savage Land, I don't know, fix it, watch it. It's streaming. It's on Found TV right now. I just revisited it recently. And it's phenomenal. So if you haven't watched it, please do. We didn't ruin anything, I promise.
No, we kept all the big secrets. I promise.
We kept all the secrets.
A ton of stuff to take away from that.
So good. Well, cool. Well, I think that's going to probably wrap up this episode of Influential Horror. If you have not watched the interview about Ask or the review about Ask, highly recommend checking those episodes out. We did the review for Found Footage Fridays, and the interview is under Filmmaker Interviews. There's a playlist for that. That's still available on POV?
Yes, POV Horror. Yep. Okay. And it will be popping up. I did find out it will be in the new year. It'll be 2025 before we see it. We're in a holiday season now, so everybody's sitting back. So it'll be 2025 before it's available on Amazon Prime and Tubi and all those places. But it is still available right now at POV Horror, and it's only $1. Yeah. It's worth it. I promise.
And it's more than worth it. Definitely go check it out. And I'll put Chris's links below where you can find him as well on the social medias. Well, cool. Well, thanks so much for hanging out with us on this episode of Influential Horror. We hope you guys have a great rest of your week and enjoy your weekend whenever you get to it. And we will see you in the next one.